So first and foremost, any questions?
I have a quick question. So I was reading over the book, and it says that a factor for authentication can be something you own, but I've heard conflicting things about that. Or let me double check. I think I have the page.
So factors of authentication are something you possess. So own would work, like your cell phone could, or a key or a swipe card. Something you know, like a password or a PIN, or something you are, biometrics.
Cool, thank you, because I've heard both. So I just wanted to check that up.
Okay. Another thing I want to point out to people, based on some of the grading, and some questions one person put in, this seems like a trick question. Yeah, some of the questions may be a little tricky. This is not accidental. This is deliberate. And the reason it's deliberate is because in cyber, details matter. Precision matters. And so you have to be careful when you read the questions, read them correctly. And as I mentioned last time too, you know, things like my son, and it's like, I'm not touching the monitor, my pen is. You know, this happens all the time in systems. So read the questions very carefully. Don't make assumptions. If you do make an assumption about something, you don't think, you know, the answer has one correct answer, try and tell me the assumption. Hopefully it's a valid assumption. One thing I've told my students in the more advanced classes, there is no, in a lot of times, the only correct answer in computer science and in cyber is it depends. Okay, because it depends on the context. You know, is this system secure? Well, yeah, the system is secure because it's on an independent system buried at the bottom of a mountain where, you know, you have to get through all these guards and biometric devices and everything to get to it. Oh, and by the way, it's unplugged and has nothing on it. You know, even if it's plugged in, it's a very different context than if it's sitting out on a sidewalk with no password. So you got to think about these things and what are the contexts. So I tell my students, all the correct answer is depends. It depends on what is what matters. I give you 0 points for saying it depends. I give you points for telling me what it depends on, why this is the case. With the homework also, I like explanations. I like you to think further. So I was on a little picky on some of the grading, not on the others. One thing I want you to think of, because I didn't really push this much, on the homework question where it asked about like the tapes, the backup tapes with encrypted data not being stolen. Is that really a loss of confidentiality if it's encrypted? Some people said yes, some said no. Some people said yes because they believe somebody can eventually break the encryption. Other people said no because they can't break the encryption. So it depends on how strong the encryption is. I have seen backup tapes. This was years and years ago, where it was a big tape. So I'm talking decades ago, actually. They had backup tape and they had written on there encryption password on the sticker on the box for the tape. So this way, you know, we wouldn't lose the password. People, right? They break things. So, all right. Actually, I just realized I should have made my video bigger. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Let me go to today's slides, chapter 3 stuff. Oops. So we finished talking last time about identification, authentication. You know, who do you claim to be and how can the system validate that identity, that claim of identity? And we talked just about it. There could be multiple factors. You know, we can use passwords. We can use swipe cards. We can use biometrics. I can have a little, you know, one-time password device. We can have combinations of those. So user, I say, here's my user ID, that's my claim identity, here's my password, and then it texts me a secret code to type in. So I have possession of a phone. So multiple factors there. So that's kind of what we were talking about. Reminder, Chapter 2's homework's due tonight. Quiz 1 is also due tonight. Quiz 2 is due on Wednesday. Quizzes are a 15-minute time frame. Shouldn't take you that long, but I tried to give you enough time to think about them. All right. But now that and those are online, available. You should be able to get access to them. Please do them. Not everybody I know has finished Quiz 1 yet. Make sure you get it done before midnight. Pacific time tonight, yes. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about, which comes next chapter, is we say, this is who I am. I've been authorized. The system believes me. What can I now do? That becomes the whole next chapter. What am I allowed to do? Now, the important thing I want you to remember, just because you can do something does not mean that you should, right? Just imagine we're in a real physical classroom. I could be standing next to the door just inside the classroom. You could walk in and I could punch you. I could throw a water balloon at you. I had a high school teacher who did squirt bottles at people. I could hug you. I could kiss you. Those are all things I can do. Probably none of them I should do. Some of them are probably illegal. Some are just unacceptable. I could hand you an exam to do. Probably acceptable. I can do all those things. And this reminds me of things, we deal with children sometimes. Mom, can I do this? Yes, you can, but you may not do it. You're physically capable, but you're not permitted. You don't have the authorization. Okay. We run into this all the time. I think about the riots at the Capitol a couple weeks ago. Some people in their defense are saying, well, I didn't break the window. The doors were wide open. I just walked into the Capitol building. Why am I in trouble? Well, yeah, because the Capitol building was closed. That's called trespassing. And one person said, well, the guards started pushing against us, so I was standing my ground. Well, they're pushing against you because you were in a place you weren't supposed to be in, and you were told to leave. They could do it. They think, therefore, they were allowed. No. I see this a lot with cybersecurity systems and computer systems. Oh, I could get into this computer system and read this person's email, so I'll do it. I mean, I have permission right now to get in. I have the ability, let me correct myself, I have the ability to log in and see your full transcripts. I can see your listed home address and phone number and email and test scores. I can see that probably for every student at this university if I tried. I'm not supposed to. I'm supposed to look at things that are important or necessary for me to do the job as your instructor or advisor. Okay, just because I can doesn't mean I should, but some people think it's a computer system, I can do it. And I always ask them, oh, so if I left my front door open to my house, you could walk in and start going through the papers in my desk. You think that's okay? Well, no, that's not okay. Then why is it okay going through the papers in my computer? Okay, so just remember this. There's a whole area we'll talk about in terms of ethics when it comes to cybersecurity and dealing with what you should do and shouldn't do. I'm going to add one more to this because it's really, really important. This happened several years ago in Portland area. There was a white hat hacker, so a good guy, who was doing penetration testing, trying to break in a computer system to see what, see what was, how they could break into the system, what were the vulnerabilities in the system so the company could make its system more secure. He was hired to do this. He spent, a certain amount of time doing it. They liked what he did. They had hired him full time to be a developer for them, a secure developer. So he was hired to now do work doing secure system development. They had just finished a release. They shipped out a product, and he was trying to decide, oh, I got a little downtime. What should I do? Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll go back and do that hacking I was hired to do 2 years ago and see if they fix those problems. So he did. He got into the system. He got into the system without permission. He was not told he could hack, but he went in because, hey, I'd done this before. I'm still allowed. Long story short, the guy went to jail. Okay, because he broke into a part of the system that was for a government contract. So he was violating federal laws. But he was hired to do that before, and it was okay. But now he wasn't hired. The authorization changed. And he didn't check. And he thought he was doing the company. He thought he was being a good Samaritan, doing the things he was able to do it, but no, went to jail. So this is just important to understand. There are rules and limits to all these things. Okay. So authorization, I talked about as being authorized. What do we mean by authorization? Well, authorization is the act of authorizing. Well, that's useless. Authorizing means to endorse, empower, justify, or permit by, or as if by some recognized or proper authority, such as custom, evidence, personal right, or regulating power. That's Merriam-Webster definition, okay? Basically, authorizing means giving permission to do something. For our purposes, it's going to be authorization means you're given access, permission to access a resource. And this means both data and operation. So I could say, hey, I have access to this database. I have access to this file. I can run this program. I can perform this action. I can create a file, delete a file, those types of things within our computer system or information system. Now, I decided I would look up this definition in the NIST special publication I have that I gave you all access to. They use authorization to mean something different. And I have heard this definition before. They talk about having an authorizing authority. And basically, it's an official management decision given by a senior organizational official to authorize, to give permission, to operate an information system and to explicitly accept the risk and organizational operations. So the mission, functions, image, or reputation, organizational assets, individuals, other organizations in the nation based on the implementation of an agreed upon set of security controls. Long story short, so one of my former students does this for a living for the Navy. Her job is to look at the software that the Navy's going to purchase and says, this is how we are going to configure it in this system with these controls enabled, these passwords and everything, so that it is an acceptable level of risk for the Navy to use that system. Okay, so that's our authorized to operate. That is different than the authorizations we're talking about in this chapter. The NIST definition doesn't have this word in that book, so it gets confusing, but I just wanted to be clear on that. Any questions on that one? Okay. So how do we make authorization decisions? We basically have controls, security mechanisms, and processes in place to provide that authorization, to tell the system, yes, this person could do this. It's usually based on their authenticated identity or some other attribute of them or the data, and we'll get into what those are. The reason we have these access control lists is a lot of people think of them as terms of, we're going to map it to a triple, which I don't have in here. But the base is, actually, let me write that one in because that'll be useful. The way I like to look at it is user action object. So I have a user, the person, the entity, the system that wants to do something. What do they want to do? That's the action. I want to read a file. I want to delete a file. I want to send a message. I want to run a program. Okay, I want to enter something in the database or read the database. And then the object is that file, that message, that network, that program. That's what I want to perform the action on. And so our access control list says this user requesting this action on this object, yes or no. That's generally what we think of access control lists as, helping us make that decision. So giving you access is one way of thinking about it. I want to give access to someone. I want Hunter to have this access. I want Jacob to have this access. What is that access? Enter a building, run a program, read or write a file, delete a file. Or maybe I want to deny access. It's the opposite of allowing access. Now, good systems usually deny by default. Unless I say you're allowed, you are not allowed. Some systems are the other way. We will do things, the book calls it, black holing. But basically, I could have a list of websites or networks that I'm not allowing access to. So parental software for web browsers will do this. They'll say, hey, you're not allowed to access these websites. These are the bad sites. Don't let somebody there. So we'll have an access control list that denies it. Says, the user, my child, the action, go read the website, the object, that specific website. No, they're not allowed to go to playboy.com. They're not allowed to go to whatever. That's a common way it's used. I've also seen sites where for network access, they say, okay, we know this range of network addresses, internet protocol addresses, IP addresses. We have seen attacks from them. So anything coming from those addresses, we're going to disallow. Okay, so that becomes another issue. Or just limit access. Maybe it's a read-only access we want to do. We don't want to give them read, write, or execute. Or maybe we want to, what we call sandbox the code. So I download some code from the internet. I want to run it, a program inside my browser. I run it in a limited execution environment inside my computer, so it doesn't have access to everything in the computer. It has access to run in that limited environment. Java virtual machine, JavaScript engines, those are things that are supposed to do this. Now, if they aren't written well, people can escape out of those limited sandbox environments, spill the sand everywhere, basically, but they get out into your system and attack your system. So we have to worry about those. Revoking access, as I talked about earlier with that example, is a very important thing. Yes, I have access to your records now as students in my class. Once you leave my class, should I still have that access? Or should it be revoked? I work for the University of Idaho right now. I have access to all student records. Once I leave the university, definitely should not have access to any student records, as when I'm no longer employed by the university. How do we turn off that access? Depends on the mechanisms we use. And we'll talk about some of those later in the semester. And in your career, you'll learn about lots of different mechanisms for enabling and denying access. When you go to, I'll give you one example though, related. When you go to a website, I mentioned this earlier, the website can share credentials, kind of proof that they are who they say they are. It's a cryptographic digital certificate, we call them. Sometimes those certificates get outdated or corrupted. It could be corrupted. Somebody, for some reason, got a hold of the password and created fake versions of the certificates. Nationally, a revocation list goes out, and then your browser, when it updates things, is supposed to download this new revocation list and say, oh, these certificates are now bad. Don't use them. Even though the website says it's good, the date's good, this is evidence somebody stole that credential. And so we want to have lists for doing that too. So any questions on that? 9 nodding yet. Okay. An access control list is a computer system implementation for managing authorization with access controls. Typically, it's a list of permissions for an authenticated user group, and I'll get to those in a minute. They state the actions that an entity is allowed to perform on that specified resource. For example, files or directories in a computer system typically have read, write, and execute permissions. And a lot of systems associated with a specific user or group of users. So faculty at the University of Idaho will have certain read permissions on things or write permissions. The owner of a file may be able to read and write it where other people can only read it, like websites. I can read your website, but I can't modify it. But as an owner, you can modify it. So let's look at an example here from Windows. Okay. I have here a file, and I right-clicked on the file, and up popped this menu. At the very bottom was a thing called, the properties for the file. So I selected that. That then popped up this properties tab. So properties window, which has a general settings, security, details, and versions. So I click on the security tab. That then opens up this. So you see I'm in the security tab, opens up this. So on this machine I was doing this example on, we have the system, we have myself, we have administrators of the machine. I don't have any other users. These are the permissions for system right here. We allow all these. If I click on edit, I open up a new window to make changes. I clicked on my own name and it says these are my permissions. I could now change different permissions here. I can also add a new group or username. So maybe I had a friend who wanted to use a computer. So I'd say, friend or whatever, or guest. Or like sometimes there's a laptop I loan out to my students. So there'll be presentation as the name of the user ID we use in that group. Okay. And then you can I can allow certain things or deny them. Now, what's interesting here, so this one I currently have full permissions for the file. I can do anything I want. If I click on modify, that allows me to also read and execute, read and write. If I turn off write, I also don't have modify. So modify is a shortcut for these bottom three. Okay, but we have the ability to read, write, execute a program. So I could say I could read it but not execute, because maybe it's not an executable file. I don't want to let you execute it, or I don't trust you to execute it. So in Windows, we have this ability. Okay, you can specify users, you can specify groups, you can modify, like I said, to do a shortcut for read and execute, write. Read and execute cannot have this unless you also have read, because it's read and execute. So if I click that, I'm going to get the read permission. Right, now that becomes an interesting one. Can I be able to write something without reading it? Any thoughts? I will look at you closer. Can you be able to write something without being able to read it? So maybe I could overwrite it, empty it out, right? Or can I delete something? Is that considered writing? And we'll get back to that one in a minute. But so, yeah, in theory, we should be able to write something without being able to read it. I can't execute something without being able to read it because I have to read the code that's in it to execute that code. But I should be able to overwrite something without reading it. And in some systems, we also have the concern or issue, what if multiple people are using it at the same time? That's beyond this class. How do we deal with who can write when? Okay. So here's another example from Linux. So I have a directory here. I just did a list. So what Linux does, instead of having that nice GUI interface, and there are GUI graphical user interfaces for this. This is command line. What we have here is this first column deals with file type. So the D here means this is a directory. So it's a subdirectory of the current directory I'm in. These are then the different permissions we can have: read, write, and the last one is execute. And we have it 3 times. The reason we have it 3 times is the first triple, the read, write, execute, is for the owner of the file, the user. The second is for the group they belong to. So here, my user ID is Jim AF. The group I belong to is faculty. So this one, I can read, write, execute. Faculty can read and execute, but they can't write it. And then the last one is for the rest of the world, everybody else in the system, and they can also read and execute. This next one, I can read and write, faculty can read and write, but nobody in the world else in the world can execute. So we have ways of controlling this in Linux. We have actually a command we can use called chmod. Change the mode is what it's standing for. So you can use symbols. A lot of people don't teach it this way. This is the right way to do it, but a lot of people don't teach it this way. So I'm saying the user is read write on whatever my file name is. Or maybe group and others, I subtract out read and execute, write and execute, so they only have read access. A lot of people will use octal numbers for these too, like Shmod 644 my file, which basically each of these triples is a 3-bit octal value. So numbers 0 through 8, 0 through 7, excuse me. But it's 3 bits. So you have the 4-bit, the 2-bit, and the 1-bit. So if the 4-bit is set, this number's a 4. If the 2-bit set, it's a 2. 4 and 2 is a 6. The 4-bit is read, write, execute. So read only is a 4. Read and write is a 6. Read, write, execute is a 7. Let's see. Read and execute would be a 5. Okay, a lot of people memorize those numbers. If you use those numbers, it prevents them from ever changing it in the system. And they never will, because too many people built those numbers into their code back in the 70s. I use the symbols because when you use symbols, you're not hard coding in numbers. It's good programming practice. Okay, let me see what I can do here. Where'd that window go? Oops. I gotta share that with you guys. Okay, what I have here is I have a Linux computer in my office here. I am using a program called X2Go. So X is a windowing program, a standard windowing program for Linux machines, really old style. They have more modern versions of it, but we've kept this name here. X2Go allows me to remotely log into the machine and see the graphical user interface, not just command line. So I can see all the, everything. I can open up my directories and do whatever I want there without having that machine physically plugged into my monitor. I have access to a machine that's physically in my office on campus, and I can remotely access it from home. So nice thing to have. Anyway, oh, I'm on the wrong window. So the ls command lists the files in a, let me shrink this a little, in a Linux program. ls-l-l for your option gives me some details, a detailed listing. So this is what I had done before that you saw. Give me the direct listing. So I could do something like Shmod. Let's see, let's do, this will probably not work. I think I made a mistake. ls log, let's do everybody. You can use all for everybody, read, write, execute. And now that one has all these permissions, where before it didn't have the write and execute for the group, didn't have execute for anybody. So you can change the permissions using that type of command. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this, if you use H means human readable. So you look, these are file sizes here. It's megabytes, kilobytes, much easier to read than just the raw numbers. Just a little hint for something if you ever do this. You will end up using Linux in some of your classes. So we'll eventually show you how to do this and get access to it. What becomes interesting is the directory, tempter. So tempter, if I look in that, has the same files. I just copied them in there. It has the D thing telling me it's a directory, and I have read, write, execute access to it. What if I removed, so user minus execute of tempter. Whoops, got to spell it right. So now I no longer have execute access to it. Let me still see if I can see what's in it. Notice it says permission denied. However, it shows me the list of all the files in there. It just doesn't tell me anything about them. And I can't, it's because the ls command is trying to get information about the files. The execute flag for a directory gives me permissions to look inside the directory. So if you think about it, think about a directory as a file with a list of all the files that are inside that. directory. If I can read that list, I can get an access of everything that's in there. That's what these are. If I can write that list, I can change what's in the directory. So if I have read or write permission, if I write permission to a directory, I can add new files to the directory because I modify this directory list. If I can read it, I can find out information about those files. What execute does is says, let me go into that directory and look at the contents of those files. So let's grab that file name from the directory file, the directory listing, and find out information about it. So I need execute for that. If I get rid of read permission, I can't even see the files that are in there. Now, I have read permission to a file that's in there, ls.log, but to find where ls.log is, the system needs to have permission. So if I add back, let's see, execute permission to the directory, I still don't have permission to read it, but I have permission to look at the contents of a file that's inside there. Now let's do a more interesting one. So if I know enough about the file, execute allows me to look up the information in the directory to figure out where the file is on a hard drive. And then because I already have permission to that file, I can do things. But I can't read any directory information about the file. I can't know the file size. I can't know who owns it or the attributes. So directory permissions get a little weird. You really need read and execute to a directory to do things well in a computer system. To delete a file, I need write access. Now, I could delete the file without having read access because as long as I have write access to the directory, I should be able to delete it. I could delete a file I don't have any read or write access to the file. As long as I own the directory the file's in, then I can delete it. There are some caveats there. If I don't own the file, I still can't delete it. So if somebody else owns the file and it happens to be in my directory, I can't delete it. In most systems, it gets locked. Anyway, so those are some of the interesting things we have. I should go back because I made it. So what if I did, so I did chmod, right? I said, maybe I don't want anyone to have execute access or read access. Execute, I don't want them to do this. And I did star. Star is a wildcard, means all the files in that directory. // means everything in that directory, subdirectories, right? Years and years ago, so 1991, I typed this with that extra space. The main / hex says go to the main directory of the hard drive and disable execute access. So don't let anybody get access to the directories that are at the top of your hard drive. And if you can't get to the top, you can't get anything below. The system administrator had misconfigured the file system so that faculty had write permission to that top level directory. So I disabled access for all faculty on that server by typing this command, including myself. And so I had to go find the system administrator and beg him to fix it. Unfortunately, he was able to fix it. If I do a -R, it does it recursively, so I can change permissions all the way down the system. Well, that's really bad if I typed in the wrong directory and had permission. So we got to be careful. I'm going to do chown, which is change owner. And now, instead of part of the faculty group, it's part of the group that's me, myself. So there, in each Linux system, there's a group where you are the only member of the group. So you're completely one. And then you have other groups, system administrator groups, something called wheel, which is a standard system administrator group, the printer group, the admin group, pseudo group, which you'll all learn about later. All right. So anyway, that's the fun one I have with that. Any questions? Okay. So this is what I was just answering. Okay. What about beyond the file system? We can have a network access control list. usually based on machine identifiers, message contents, things like, can machine Alice send a message of type XX to machine Bob? Now I'm going to do another aside here. Alice and Bob are really important in cybersecurity. They're the classic example of people who want to communicate with each other over a network. Machine A and Machine B, but we decide to call them Alice and Bob. They're always trying to talk to each other. Eve gets a little jealous. She's the eavesdropper. So she listens in on their messages. There's Igor, who's an intruder who tries to do things. Charlie's generally a centralized server. These go back to the 1970s time frame. Anyway, I'll use Alice and Bob a lot. Just they want to talk. Can Alice send a message of a certain type? This is usually implemented in routers or firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, intrusion detection systems, devices that sit on the network between you and the real world and the outside world, limiting the messages that go through. We'll give details about those later. Network messages, usually called packets, contain MAC addresses, media access control addresses. If you've ever tried to set up a device, often it'll ask, what's your MAC address? Figure out your MAC address. And then internet protocol addresses. So your MAC address, if you put it in Ethernet, plug in your Ethernet card, that card has a worldwide unique MAC address. Your cell phone for the Wi-Fi has a worldwide unique MAC address. They can be spoofed, but let's assume they're not spoofed. When something wants to communicate with my computer in my internal network at home, they use those MAC addresses, compute between devices. If we want to go out into the internet, we use the internet protocol addresses, 192.168.1.1. That's an IP address. Again, we'll talk about those later. Each message also has a protocol field. So who is using these messages on my computer? Is it TCP, the Transmission Control Protocol, which is a connection-oriented protocol. Again, we'll talk about this later. UDP is a datagram protocol. And then on top of those, they use ports. 80 for web, 443 for HTTPS, 22 for secure shell, 143 for IMAP for your email. And so you say, okay, this is a TCP message, port 80, that's a web thing. UDP port 80 may be something else. And so the firewalls will look at all these rules and say, okay, yes, the outside world can talk to this machine's web server, which is at port 80, because we trust it. But they can't talk to secure shell or email on that because we don't trust them to do that, or this is not an email server. And so we can have those types of access controls. There are some weaknesses with these. Once someone's in the system, they have all the permissions and authorizations of that user. The programs run by the user have the authorizations of me. If a program runs with more permissions, that can even be worse. And that happens all the time. I run a program that has extra permissions to do things on my behalf. All right. There's something called what they call, the book's calling confused deputy attacks. Basically, I go to a web browser. Web browser's I'm logged in. I'm using it. It's my browser running on my behalf. Now, maybe I've logged in recently to Amazon and it remembers my login. So the next time I go, I don't have to log in again, right? You probably all have done this. If I go to another website, if that website has a specially crafted code in it, it comes in and it says, hey, I need you to download this image file. And as part of doing that download, it also goes to Amazon and places an order on my behalf using my credentials, but shipping it to them. The web browser says, oh yeah, we're logged into Amazon, all the credentials here. Amazon says, hey, are you really who I was just talking to? And the browser says, yeah, here's the information. I'm who you thought I am. Amazon says, okay, and places the order. Called cross-site request forgery. Okay. We'll show some examples of that later in the semester because that's really a interesting type of attack. And it's based on the way browsers work. The other one I want to talk about here is called clickjacking. So you see the screen in front of you, right? And maybe it's an Amazon screen. and you see a button that says place order. So you click it. This actually happens more. Oh, I don't have my cell phone with me. With cell phones, it's been an attack on older versions of cell phones. You have your screen, so you're typing in things. What if somebody put a transparent app on top of your login or on top of the screen where you enter your passcode? So as you're typing in things into this invisible keyboard, it's keeping track of what you're typing in and storing it locally. And then it sends it to the app that was underneath it. Or it pops up an error message for you saying it didn't work, makes and gets rid of itself, so then you retype in the right thing. Okay. Clickjacking takes advantage of these rendering algorithms and overlays on systems. So there's permissions now in your modern cell phone where you can say, don't let apps overlay my app. You know, when it redraws on top of me, disable me. So they can't, you know, don't show me. So people can't think they're actually typing in the wrong thing. Okay, these are again things where you think you've got something, and because it has your permissions, your authorization, that program's running on your behalf, you type things in, it gets it, and it owns it. And so these are access control lists can't help with that, and so we have to think around that. All right, there's something else called a capability. Think of it as a ticket. I log into a system and I said, I need permission to open this file. So it gives the system on my behalf a copy of this capability, but it's only to open that one file, maybe for only a certain time or a one-time job or whatever. They're more complex systems to manage, so we're not going to talk about more, but I just want to let you know they're there. You can share capabilities with other users. Maybe I have read-write access to a file. I have that capability, so I copy the capability and send it to you guys, but a read-only version of it. So you don't have write access to the same system. But then you could share it with anybody. Okay. Details beyond the scope of this course, but all right. I didn't give myself enough time for this. Okay, we're going to do this first thing tomorrow. So Wednesday, I want you to think about this. We'll do some breakout groups. I want you to think there's a concept called policy versus mechanism. Go back to that first slide. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Policy talks about what you're authorized to do, what you're allowed to do. Mechanisms are what help enforce that. Right? So I have a lock on my front door of my house, and we have keys. The mechanism is the lock with the key that lets people in the house. The people with the key are those who are authorized to get in the house. Now, if I accidentally left the door unlocked, somebody could walk in bypassing the mechanism. Or I left my window open, they came in through the window. They're bypassing the front door mechanism. And they're doing something they're not allowed to do, but the mechanism did not stop them. So you think about defense in depth and types of things. Not all mechanisms completely enforce policies. We have, I don't put it on the slides here, we have three different aspects of mechanisms, what we call broad, secure, well, broad, precise, and secure. A secure one is a stronger mechanism than what the old policy allows. So my front door, great example. The policy says my family's allowed to come into the house. What if I forgot my key? The mechanism prevents me from coming in the house, even though the policy says I'm allowed. So that's secure. Precise would be a front door that always lets somebody from my family in and nobody else, you know, without permission from a family member. Broad, maybe, you know, anybody can get in. I leave it unlocked. Okay, so some mechanisms within aspects of certain policies, they're too broad. They don't enforce enough. Some are precise. Some are too strong. I always tell people mechanisms or technology should not dictate policy. When I first got here, the policy was I could not get access to student records unless I was their advisor or they were in my class. When they first rolled out Vandal web type stuff and Banner, they gave me access to everybody's records. And I said, but that's not. And they said, we're going to change the policy. So all faculty have access to all student records. And I argued with them. I said, no. They said, well, we can't enforce that there's only your advisor, only person in your class. And I said, the mechanism may not be able to enforce it, but when it was paper and pencil world, when everything was paper documents, you still enforced it by saying yes or no. Do you have access? I will give it to you or not. We can still say that's the policy, and we can do training with people to say, don't look. And we hope they follow the rules. We know they can look, but they're not supposed to. Definitely don't share, because that's really a breaking of the laws. There's a whole law called FERPA, Family Educational Right to Privacy Act, from the 1970s. All faculty and TAs and everything, anybody who accesses student records has to do FERPA training every year to remind them what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do with student records. That is a mechanism. It's a policy, but it's a control and enforcement thing. And there's penalties if you break the rules. Okay, so people got to understand there is a difference between what is implemented and what the rules are. And we try to get them as close as possible, but it's not going to be perfect. And so I was going to ask, I have breakout groups to ask about this. We'll do that next time. So any questions on this stuff? Now, somebody said you could make a program or computer read, this is earlier, read a file instead of you. And this is important, but when I say you read or somebody's permitted to read, I do mean the program on your behalf. But yeah, we have to be careful. When a program is running in a computer system, it's running with the authorization of a specific user. So it's running with my permissions, my credentials. And you can look on systems, say, hey, who's running which program? And see, oh, this is a Jim AF program. This is a root program. This is a Bob Smith program. This is whoever's on that system. All right, so we'll just get started. Let's see, where's my slides? So last time I was talking about access control lists, and some ideas of how we do this, like in Windows or in Linux. Gave some examples of that. And the idea is, again, we're talking really about authorization and who is allowed to do certain things. And usually the things we talk about are read, write, execute. But if it's a network, who can send a message? Can machine A, Alice, send a message to machine B, Bob? Those are the types of things we want to think about in our systems. And we're going to expand on that today in terms of what I really want to look at is what is the policy going to be? How do we set these things up? Who is allowed to do what? But there are some weaknesses with these systems. Sometimes, like I mentioned last time, there is the ability to trick the system into believing I have authority or authorization to do something. As well as if I get into the system, I have your password and your user ID, I'm you. For the purposes of the system, I can do what I want. So just think about these as we move forward. What I wanted to do to begin with here, do another little breakout group thing. You're going to have odd numbered groups and even numbered groups. For the odd numbered groups, I want you to think. So, I mentioned this last time, but I'll say again. I want to think about we're talking about the difference between policy and mechanism. And this is something that's going to come up again and again. Policy is what are the rules we want to be followed? What do we want to allow? Mechanisms try to enforce those policies, but may not be incomplete. So I have two pseudo policies here. For odd numbered groups, I have a file on my computer system that I quote unquote own. I've created the file, I'm editing the contents. My boss, the policy is my boss wants to restrict who I can give access to. Okay. A normal Linux or Unix type system, I can say, hey, I'll give it to whoever, this is Bob Smith has an account on the system. I'll give the access to Bob Smith. I can give the access to all faculty. So I want you to think about things a boss can do to restrict my ability to give access to other people. And it could be new technologies. It could be just different policy. Think what you want to think. Discuss it. We'll come back and talk about it. For the even numbered groups, pretend I'm an author or you're an author of a book. I wrote a book. I create and sell electronic copies of the book. I want to make money on my book. It's my book. So if I give it to Oscar, sell it to Oscar, can I control who Oscar gives it to? So Oscar doesn't make a copy to everybody else in the class for free, and none of you pay me. And I know some of you know how to do this, and you can find PDF copies of books out there that somebody's copied and put out there that you didn't pay for and you haven't access to. Is there a way I can control this? So I want you to think about that. So that's breakout group 2. And on both of these, it is okay to discuss, do you even want to allow a mechanism to exist to enforce these things? So you think about those. I'm going to just set up the groups. So, and you all hit upon, there are problems with this. We can't use technology to solve all the problems. People will bypass it. So there was one thing about like somebody saying Netflix where you tried to do a screenshot. So I'm assuming the screenshot there is not holding up my cell phone and taking a picture, but rather using technology on the computer, doing a screenshot on the computer. And there's software in place that'll block that. It reminds me, so I think it was just a year ago. Could have been 2. Anyway, our local Fox affiliate up in Spokane was fighting with the cable provider, and so they stopped broadcasting Fox on my Dish network, and I couldn't get the Super Bowl. So this was frustrating. I couldn't watch Super Bowl. But Yahoo Sports allowed me to stream the Super Bowl fine on my tablet. So then I plugged my tablet in, or maybe it was my laptop. Anyway, I plugged that in so the external monitor could be my big screen so the whole family could watch it. It said, nope, not enabled for this application. So I set up a second laptop with a webcam, pointed the webcam at the screen of the first laptop, and then did the video from the second laptop to the monitor so then we could all see the whole football game. It worked. I bypassed the software controls because I could physically see it, I could get a copy of it. And that's always going to be a problem. If I make it allow somebody to see something, I can see it. And yeah, I can use my cell phone to take pictures of the screen. I'm completely disconnected from any controls that are in that system. So there's only so much we can do. Yeah, I can set up, you have to have a certain app installed to read it. You have to do all these other things, but it doesn't always work. Same thing with controlling what I share with people at work. You trust me to have a copy of the software, I can read it. I can get that data to someone. There's going to be a way for me to get the data to someone. So you have to trust me to a certain level. Now, maybe you have the threats. Here's your penalty if you're caught doing this. I did have one going back to the PDF, but it was the same type of thing where I had bought a PDF document and a standard, which was a formal specification, something, so it's expensive. They said it was licensed to Jim Alswass at University of Idaho. That was on the PDF everywhere. I went to print it. I had to be online to print it because it was working with the Acrobat Reader software. Did a check. Online says, has he ever printed before? I was allowed to print 1 copy. The printer jammed. That broke my chance to print that 1 copy. And they tried to do all these other, and I couldn't print it to a file. I could only print to a printer. So they put in all these software controls to try and prevent the copying. But at some point it gets too tricky for someone, and yeah, they're going to do something separate. So good. All right, I'm going to talk about a few things. I got a little time on the slides here. Let's see, there we go. There are different types of policies we talk about when we talk about cybersecurity policies. So the first type, and we're gonna go over these. There's a lot here and a lot of math behind these that I'm not covering. But we have what we call DAC, or discretionary access control. That's what you're used to in a normal computer system. The owner of the file controls access. I have it. It's on my system. I should say the possessor of the file. And I can say who else gets copies. Similar to what the one student was talking about at work. Well, actually, let's move to the next one. That's more of what's at work. Mandatory access control, where the system enforces some limits. And if you think of like military, top secret, secret, confidential, unclassified, what we often see here in these systems is the documents are labeled with some label, engineers only, top secret, whatever, and you're restricted from changing those permissions. The system prevents you because you're not allowed to do that. Now, it gets hard. So maybe mandatory access says I can read the file, but I can't share it with anyone. Could I get a copy of that file and email it to someone? Again, a good mandatory access control system would say, no, you're not allowed to copy it. Yes, I could still take a picture with my phone. Because so maybe I can't bring the phone in. And I've been in places where they take all your electronic devices from you. You have to be careful because the guard who's taking the electronic device has to know what they're doing. I talked to somebody, this was years ago. He had visited, I think, the FBI or a CIA building. And as he was leaving, the guard stops him. He had a briefcase. They said, we need to search your briefcase. And he's like, all right. So the guard opens the briefcase, pushes aside the computer disks that were in there, and looks through the papers and says, okay, you're good to go. And he says, so I'm asking, what were you looking for? He said, well, I want to make sure you didn't have any classified documents, papers in your briefcase. But was clueless that they could be electronic versions, because that's not what they were trained to do. Well, nowadays we can get a lot of data on a very small thing that may not even look like it's a USB drive or anything else. I've actually even, I've seen USB things on watches where you can pull it in and out of the watch. I've seen somebody have a USB drive in their belt. It was weird. But, so anyway, rule-based access control it's typically what we find in networks. It's not based on a person or a document. It's just a standard rule, like this external IP address may send a request to port 443, which is the secure website port on machine Sally. Sally will be my server. And so we allow that message to come through, but we don't go to other places in the network. Role-based access control is a common one that people like. It's based on your job, not based on you. And it could be my role as a faculty member or an instructor for this class. As a role of instructor for this class, I have certain permissions. Whoever is instructor for this class has those same permissions. It's not, and so I'm assigned to a role, and my roles can change over time. A couple years ago, I was department chair for a semester as our department chair was out sick. So acting department chair, I had the role as department chair for, a couple months. So role-based access is really good. You define it based on their, supervisor, whatever. And a person can have multiple roles, maybe one at a time, and they can switch roles. So I have a role as an instructor now. I have a role as the lead researcher on a research grant. I have a role of center director. My center director role does not give me access to your files and your grades, but my instructor role does. And so these are things just think about that people do. Let's see, get to the right screen here. There's also what we call ORCON, originator access control. I created the book. I'm the originator. I'm the person who actually created this thing. I control the access forever. I'm the copyright owner. Now, actually, let's get back thinking about that. Go back to the book idea, the electronic book, right? I've got a paper book here. I can loan this to anybody who I want. I can hand it off to other people. My phone just tried to answer something for me. This book I paid for, but I can now give it to other people. Now, I'm not giving a copy. I'm transferring my possession of the book to someone else. So only one person at a time has physical access to it. Now, granted, somebody could take it over to copy machine and scan the pages, and that breaks that rule. But we're used to that. We have a system in place and a mechanism and a culture in place for what we do with the physical books. But electronic makes it easy to make multiple copies of this physical book and multiple people having access at the same time. And we're still trying to figure out how to do that electronically. I was involved in a project years ago, a discussion, it never ended up being a project, where they wanted to do something, what do they call it? I don't remember now the name. A beacon, a book beacon. Basically, anytime somebody had an electronic document, if they started reading it, a signal, a message would go back to the owner saying, hey, so-and-so's reading this. And it would go to the owner's server who would check, is that the person allowed to read it? That was mostly for the government, making sure that a top secret document didn't go somewhere else. But we found so many ways around anything that people proposed that they gave up on it. We have attribute-based access control, where now and some of these get combined together. The attribute-based is like, I'm at a physical location. I'm on campus. I'm at the computer in my office. It's normal work hours, or maybe 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. We have different rules and regulations. So decisions and policies will be based on these. There's multi-level access control. This is the defense in depth of access control. Basically, you have multiple policies in place. So in the US government, for example, we have what we call designating authorities. These are people who decide, hey, is this a top secret document, a secret document? This is a type of originator access control. They define it, then they put it into a mandatory access control system that says, oh, only people who are allowed to read top secret documents can see this. And then maybe in that system, there's a additional discretionary access control. Says, yeah, I know you said everybody with top secret, but I'm only have top secret people in my group. And so, or maybe I'm the only one allowed to edit the document. And that's a very common thing we'll see. So there'll be different types of access control policies, policy ABC, and we'll merge them together to get the real policy we want. As I mentioned, there's some math behind this. There are several of these. I'm going to talk about a couple examples. One of the older ones is called Bell LaPadula, or some people say Lapadula, but I'm pretty sure it's LaPadula. David Bell, and I can't remember LaPadula's first name, did this in the mid 70s. I think it was 75 time frame. And for a project, they were trying to develop a security mechanism for a computer system that could handle government level secrets on one system, right? So we're talking, this is what we call a multi-level secure system, where you have top secret and secret documents at the same time. And their question was, how do we handle this? We know how to handle this in the paper and pencil world. I have top secret documents. They're in a special room. The person who needs to go in, there's a guard at the door. They show their identifier. The guard checks, yes, you're allowed to get access to this document. You go in, you pull the document out of the file cabinet, whatever, you read the document. You look at it. You can't take it out of that room, unless you're working in a place where maybe everybody has access. So we really control the access physically. If this is a top secret document, I'm not allowed to share it with you. I'm not allowed to take it with me. And so they're trying to do that. And they also know in the government intelligence systems, military, not only do we have these levels of security, top secret, secret, confidential, unclassified, we also have what they call compartments or categories. Maybe this is dealing with our NATO troops, or maybe it's dealing with nuclear weapons or nuclear energy, or maybe it's dealing with terrorism. And so we'll say, okay, this is a top secret document dealing with NATO. And so we're going to label it that way so people who don't have access to NATO things can't see it. A very common thing I'll see is something they call no foreign. So no foreign nationals. So I could see a document that says unclassified / and the compartment no foreign nationals. or confidential, no foreign nationals probably is more likely. So, okay, this is something I'm allowed to see, but I can't share with a foreign national. It's only U.S. citizens only, basically. And so what they do now is they give each user and software that runs on behalf of that user a clearance. I'm cleared top secret NATO, right? Or top secret cybercom. And each document is given a classification. So like confidential cybercom or confidential terrorism. And then we compare my clearance with the classification. So clearance C, classification will say D. If my level is greater than equal to the level of the document, so if it's a secret level document, I'm secret or top secret, I'm good. And all the compartments of the classification of the document are in my set of compartments I'm allowed to see. So if this is NATO nuclear, I have to be allowed to see NATO and nuclear. I could also see terrorism and other things, but this has to be a true subset or equal to this. Okay. If that is true, my clearance dominates classification. And sometimes we draw this as a graph or a chart, so we have levels top to bottom, and then we spread it out and we say, this is this group, this group, this group. But they put this together and then they created a simple security property and said, okay, a user with clearance C can only read documents with classification D if C dominates D. So if they have a higher level and a need to know, is what we call these classifications, I am authorized to see everything in those compartments. That's true. That's the paper and pencil world. That's the physical print world. Am I allowed to read this document? Yes, I have the clearance to read this document. Now, rumor has it, and I never checked this with anyone, that while they were doing this, and they had a chalkboard up and they're drawing their policy, working out, somebody said, this is not the paper and pencil world. This is not the physical print world. I can make copies. What if I took this top secret document, and I love using this trust one because and I copied it over to a directory or a file that was labeled unclassified. I took this top secret document and sent it out in an email to the world. Back then, they weren't worried about Facebook, but posted it to Facebook, right? So somebody said, oh, shoot, we have this whole policy written down. So they put a little asterisk next to what they were doing and wrote at the bottom of the board, we have to worry about copies. And that became what they called the star property, that little asterisk. That's what they claim it was. Says, oh, wait a minute. You can only write documents at classification D if D dominates C. I could take this. I have a top secret document, or say it's a secret document. I can write it to a secret file or a top secret file, but I can't write it to an unclassified. So I can't what we call declassify or downgrade the information. So these policies are basically, I can't read up, I can't read above what I'm allowed to do, I can't write down. I can't declassify the information. Now, a strong star property says you can only write at the exact same level. One concern was that if the system's not implemented correctly, I could, as an unclassified user, star property says I can write on a top secret document. Oh, so I'll overwrite all the top secret documents and erase them. So if we're not careful, I could accidentally do that. Strong star property says I can only write at my level. But we need to allow me to send a message to somebody a higher level. So if I'm just a basic soldier, no security clearance, and I need to write up to the general, well, I shouldn't write to the general anyway, but to a commanding officer who has a higher security level, I should be able to still do that. So there has to be some way of doing things. So Bell LaPadula talked about all this. They talked about discretionary access control. In addition, even though I'm say we both have all the access, so it's the same access to, well, you all have access to Cyber 110. Maybe the security level is student, category is Cyber 110. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what if you want to limit somebody else in the group? Okay, so maybe Lotus doesn't want to share it with Tony. So discretionary access controls, Lotus says, yeah, I'm in Cyber 110 this, but I also have the discretion of not allowing Tony to see it. And so we add these additional things. Their policy and the way they wrote it also assumes a property we call tranquility. Tranquility basically says the classifications don't change over time. Because some of the mechanisms break if you try to change a security classification while things are happening, while the system is running. Because it may be I gave you permission initially, and then that permission, you change the security level of the file, or I change the security level file, can you still have access? So we want to be careful with those things. Okay, now there's a problem with this model, a lot of problems. We'll go into other models later. I'm not going to cover them today, but there's one that somebody from the National Security Agency mentioned to me, and that was dealing with military access. And that was a need to know. Where we talk here about security clearance says, okay, imagine you're in a military field. You've got a gunnery sergeant in charge of a weapon, and there's enemy troops sighted. So the NSA spy plane is going over and they detect where the enemy troops is. It's all top secret classified. They send the information back to the NSA. The NSA sends the information to command. Eventually it gets down to the gunnery sergeant. Now the gunnery this is all top secret classified, highly level spy information, but the gunnery sergeant really needs to know the location of the enemy. He's in the right place with access to the right equipment. Oh, by the way, the guy's a foreign national who is trying to get his U.S. citizenship by joining the military, because we have those. Or maybe it's somebody who would never get a security clearance because they have a slight criminal record, but they're really good at shooting this big gun. They have a need to know. They're in the right place at the right time with the right need to know. How do we get them this access at the time this is happening? And we actually worked a project with the NSA when they're doing this. They said, hey, maybe instead of a spy plane, it's a pilot. No, let's leave the gunnery sergeant, right? So we wanted to be able to get a pop-up message for the gunnery sergeant. Like, you have targets, and at that time, at that place, the information was allowed to flow and be sent from the spy plane through the appropriate channels to this sergeant so that they could, gunnery sergeant, so they could do the shooting. And basic models don't handle those type of situations, but there are times we need to deal with them. And every time you think of a way you need to deal with a situation the policy doesn't manage, then you have problems, because then the mechanism breaks. And so we always got to find a way to have the mechanisms work for us the way we want them to work. Or as some of you were saying earlier, makes it too hard for people, they'll just turn it off. Okay, so I want you thinking about these. I'll go on to the rest of the stuff from this chapter on Friday. We'll probably actually be able to start chapter 4 on Friday. And remember, quiz 2 is due tonight. So if you haven't done it, a few of you haven't, make sure you get it done. Any questions? So how is everybody doing? Okay,
pretty good. It's Friday.
Good. Yeah.
It's Friday, yes.
Friday.
What does that mean anymore? Right? Just another day of the week. Means I can sleep in tomorrow morning? That's what that means?
Means I don't have to go to work.
There you go. There you go. So, there will be a quiz for chapter 3 posted after class up on BB Learn. The homework for chapter 3 is posted. Chapter 4 is a really short chapter, so make sure you read that and start reading chapter 5 for next week. Also on the quizzes, quiz 2, there was the question about the ATM machine and the ID card. And is the ID card, putting in the ID card, then typing in your PIN, is that multi-factor authentication? And as I said in the question, some people say it is. What I didn't realize is that includes the book's author. And the book author actually said in there, it's multi-factor authentication. I disagree, but because the book did that, I regraded that this morning. So anybody who said that was multi-factor got credit on the quiz. Because a couple of people pointed out, somebody even pointed out where in the book it says it. So it's like, okay, it's fair.
Thank you.
Again, I can't penalize you for actually reading the book and remembering it. So, okay. The reason I don't think it is multi-factor is putting the card in is how you're claiming your ID, because I don't go up to the ATM and say, hey, my name is, or my account number is, I just plug in the card. But they're claiming because I possess that card, that gives me that extra factor. It's a very weak factor, because if anybody has that card, they are in. And, you know, unless, that's why they added the PIN. But it's almost like saying, oh, I know your user ID is Jim AF. I'm going to type it in. I'm in. You know, it just, I'm not comfortable with it, but it's okay. There is debate in the community about this. It's a weak factor, but it's a factor. So I won't put that same question on the exam. So, okay. Last time I was talking some about the security policies. And we were talking about, you know, mandatory access control, discretionary access control, role-based, rule-based, originator-controlled. And I started talking about the Bell-LaPadula model. I wanted to see if I can share this with you. It's going to take a little while. It's going to be ugly, but we're going to try this, okay? So, oh, that is being weird on me. Come on, there we go. Okay, where's my things? Okay, that did not work. There it is, okay. So this is kind of just, actually, I'll keep it simple. So let's assume we had 2 levels in our system, faculty and students, and maybe 2 majors, computer science and English, okay? So if I have a faculty member, and I'll just abbreviate it as FAC, who has access, maybe they're a, what do you call it? High-level person, so they have access to both the English and the computer science curriculum. We would put it in the table something like this, FAC being their level. So in the military, that level would be, say, something like top secret or secret. And then we'd have the categories, red, green, blue, NATO nuclear, in this case, CS and English. According to the rules we have with respect to the Bell-LaPadula model, the faculty CS English dominates faculty CS, dominates faculty English, because this level, the FAC level, is greater than or equal to the lower FAC level. They're the same. And all the compartments here, the CS compartment, there's just the one CS, are in this list of compartments, so, or the set of compartments, CS and English. So we would say faculty here dominates this, faculty here dominates this. Notice I spelled the English thing wrong by mistake, but we'll assume that's spelled correctly. And it even dominates one where the faculty with no compartment. So just say, hey, you're a faculty member, but you're not assigned to any department. And so we draw things using this graph type notation to show this hierarchy. Now, it gets ugly when you want to expand on this. So what if we wanted to deal with, like I say, the students, right? And so I have students in different areas. And so I'll have, you know, maybe the student CS faculty, CS and English. Student CS and student English. And I apologize for any typos that show up here, because doing things on the fly always does that to you. And so, you know, this dominates this one, that dominates this. The faculty CS dominates the student CS. This one dominates this one. And now it gets real. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this one. this dominates that. Okay, but there is no known relationship between the faculty CS does not dominate the student CS and English. Although faculty is higher than student, because this requires you have to have permission for both CS and English. And this faculty member only has permission for CS, they cannot dominate this. So it becomes what we call a partial ordering. It's a lattice. So it's not a true easy to read or understand hierarchy. It is, though, what we call transitive. And the transitive property basically means if, let's just put these two in. Faculty CS English dominates faculty CS, which dominates student CS, which dominates just student. So this one also dominates the one way down here. You know, this domination relationship also exists, but we don't have to redraw it because we can follow the arrows. So we make our lives easier by not doing that one, but we still need this one. And so really, if I could draw it in 3 dimensions, it'd be prettier. Because I don't want the things overlapping. But this is what we talk about when we do this. And so the whole idea with the Bell-LaPadula security model is dealing with things in this type of hierarchy. If somebody has a clearance student, let's say just student English, what are they allowed to see? They're allowed to see anything with a classification student English or a classification student with no compartment. Faculty English, again, can see faculty English, faculty no compartment, student English, student no compartment. And so that's the reading. And so you can read anything below you if you can follow the arrows down. You can write anything up if you follow the arrows up. And I should say we always usually add in these models something at the very bottom and something at the top. The top thing has all permissions and the bottom thing has no permissions. And so everybody dominates bottom and top dominates everybody. And that closes the graph. Because sometimes we could have things where there's just no comparison in the model. Because I could have maybe, whoops, missed my box. Admin and Windows. And maybe an admin with Linux, but they're not CS, they're not English, they're completely different. But top would still dominate that, bottom would still be less than that, so they would all tie together. We'd have just one graph. Gets ugly, doesn't it? But this is where I want, this is what we want to think about. There's a whole lot of math behind how we do these and everything that's beyond the class. This whole lattice theory and everything is more of a more advanced math type of thing too. Because there's properties of the lattices, symmetry, where something dominates itself, transitivity, which I talked about, and reflexivity, where this is not. Well, I won't worry about that. So anyway, just wanted to get you kind of a visual picture of this, if that helps any. All right. Where were the slides? So that was this one. So the Bell-LaPadula model, again, each user has a clearance and each document has classification. And we have this dominates relationship. And I mentioned before last time, we have the simple security property, the no read up. You can read things you dominate. If my clearance is above or equal to that classification, I'm allowed to look at it. Otherwise, forget it, I'm not allowed. And we can apply this to lots of different domains. Like I said, it's typical in the military, but anywhere where you have a strong mandated requirement of what people are allowed to see or not allowed to see, this is one way of doing it. The star property says you can't write up, you can't write down. You can't take something that's, maybe faculty only and show it to all the students. In addition, we add discretionary properties to that, where basically, although it's faculty computer science, I may not want everybody else to see it. And so I can restrict who can see it. Before we had the new cybersecurity degree, all things in cybersecurity were taught in computer science. And so it could be, well, this is just for the cybersecurity subgroup of computer science. This is for the data science subgroup of computer science. And we could do that, but at our discretion, at our choice. And the way Bell LaPadula was implemented, it assumed tranquility. It assumed that basically classifications do not change dynamically. Now, that becomes an interesting thing. I create a document that, say, is faculty computer science, and I want to change it to make computer science and cyber, or computer science and English, or maybe make it available now to the students. I created originally with faculty, but now I want to publish it out to students. That's called declassification. We're lowering the classification. Systems, most Bell LaPadula systems allow that, but there's a very precise process, and only certain people can do that, have the authorization to declassify systems, to lower their clearance. It can't be anybody in a mandatory system. Discretionary, I can switch from faculty to students, no problem. Mandatory, I need permission to do that. In the US government, in the intelligence community, in the Defense Department, there are designating authorities who make these decisions. The highest one in the government is the president. President can say, hey, I declassify this. And supposedly he's just supposed to be able to do that with anything, or say, hey, that's now top secret, and be able to classify things. There's processes we should follow. Because one thing that you're not supposed to do is use classification to cover up a crime or incompetence. And there's been examples throughout our government of people in different places. Oh, that bad thing happened on this mission, this military mission. Let's classify it so nobody knows about it. Or, oh, we bought this product and really it doesn't do what it did, and I wasted millions of dollars taxpayer money. Let's cover it up. It's now classified so nobody can see that happened. That's illegal, and there are processes for saying, okay, that classification was incorrect because it was in place for a illegitimate reason. Way beyond anything you have to deal with, but these things happen. But one thing you do have to realize now is there are people out there who want to say, hey, I'm sitting there, I'm a lieutenant. I'm sitting there, I'm reading this data, or I'm a contractor, I read this data, it's classified, I have a security clearance, I'm allowed to see it. I look at it and say, oh, I think that's classified because it's covering up a crime. What do I do? Legally, you don't go to the press and leak it to WikiLeaks or something. There are processes where you report it to a superior, a chain of command, the inspector general's office of your organization, wherever. There are places to report those things. The people who tend to leak those types of things are ones who get impatient with the process. So I think of Snowden as an example, or Manning, Chelsea Manning. There's two more recent ones where they leak things to WikiLeaks, saying that they were doing it because they thought a crime was being covered up with the classification. They were in mandatory, secure systems and everything, but they had a way to release the data. With Snowden's case, this was a good one. Part of his job was to take classified data from one system and transfer it to another on a thumb drive. So he plugged in the one system, they copied the thumb drive, he moved over, plugged in the other, undid it. Nobody thought, oh, we should encrypt the data before we write it on the thumb drive, then decrypt it on the other. And so only people who need to know this data would see it, and not the guy physically transferring it, because he just pocketed the thumb drive, snuck it out of the place and had all the data. All right. Another type of system that people talk about is the BIBA integrity system. It's what we call the dual of Bell LaPadula. It basically, the graph almost flips Bell LaPadula upside down. because the idea is we're talking about integrity, reliability of data. If I am making a decision based on data, and I have, say, a level 3 integrity that I'm supposed to have, and assume as the number goes up, the integrity is better, right? So level 4 integrity is something with more integrity. It's something that's more reliable, and I can take that data, that very reliable data, and put it into my less reliable report, and that's acceptable. I can't take data, level 0 data. That's what you read on the internet. Completely unreliable, could be anything. I shouldn't take that and plop it into my highly reliable report. We also should be careful with, it usually doesn't work into these types of systems, but we hear things of circular dependencies. I will say something. I've seen this in politics and stuff. Somebody will say something like, I've heard rumor that this is true. And then a reporter somewhere else, let's see, XYZ News, we won't name anybody. XYZ News says, oh, it is rumored that this. And then I go back and say, hey, I said I heard it. And now XYZ News says they heard it, so it must be true. But they heard it from me when I said it earlier. And so we had that circular dependency. There's no integrity there. You can't suddenly raise the integrity because there were two sources, unless because they're not two separate sources. So in a normal BIBA type system, I can read things of higher integrity, and I can take my higher integrity and write it down to lower integrity data, but I can't go the other direction. I can't say, hey, I have this low integrity, let's make it high. Now, again, like with Bella Podula, there are processes where I could say, like thinking of doing a scientific experiment. I did the experiment once, I got a result. I did similar experiments, but not the exact same one, similar experiments multiple times, got the same results. That increases my belief in it. So that process, I can upgrade the integrity. But they're very precise processes they follow to upgrade the integrity. Taking the same experiment, especially like a software experiment, right? You run the same piece of software 10 times, you get the same result. Doesn't make it any more reliable. If you run the exact same program on the exact same data every time, nothing changes. Kind of reminds me of, when we invaded Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction, there were claims that we had all these different sources telling us there was evidence. Well, all those sources were relying on one person. That one person was sharing it with multiple people who were then sharing it with other people who were sharing it back with the US government. And if they had checked it correctly, they would have realized, no, the integrity wasn't there. Okay, this is a harder one for people to deal with. It is dealt with in more process control systems, things where we're trying to control power plants, control chemical factories, control weapon systems, airplanes. There's certain things you do in terms of the integrity of the data, reliability of the data. So confidentiality for Bella Podula, integrity for BIBA. We don't have a model for availability. Okay. Brewer and Nash, this gets sometimes called the Chinese wall policy. This one gets to be interesting. The best way is trying to avoid conflict of interest. Let's say I work for, in this example, I said law firm, but let's say a marketing firm. So I'm told, hey, we want you to make a commercial. So we're going to give you all this data about our company. It's kind of private, and you're going to use it to create a commercial for us. So I go that. Coke comes to me. I go and make a Coke commercial. Later or simultaneously, Pepsi comes. Hey, we're the greatest marketing firm in the world. They want to hire us too. But if I start working with Pepsi, I know things about their competitor Coke that maybe Pepsi doesn't want, or Coke doesn't want Pepsi to know. And the fact that I know this stuff about Coke may influence how I do Pepsi. or you can think of it in terms of insider trading with the market, right? I'm working on somebody's investments where, do they buy stock in Coke? And I'm also working with Coke doing their auditing of their finances. And I look, oh, they're going to release a financial report next week that shows they lost a whole lot of money. I'm going to tell this person Coke's stocks are going down. Don't do it. Right? There's that conflict of interest. So the whole idea here is they take data sets, which they call company groups, and they say, I've got all this data, all these objects, all these resources related to this company. This company has a conflict with this company. Coke has a conflict with company Pepsi. If I access something from one of the companies in that conflict class, I cannot access data from any of the other companies in that same class. So once I start working for Coke, I can never work for Pepsi. I can still work for Ford Motors. That's not a problem because they're not part of the same group. But once I work for Ford Motors, I can't work for, say, GM or Chrysler or Tesla. But I could work for Coke, I could work for Ford Motor, and I could work for Disney. And somebody else could work for Pepsi and work for Tesla and work for MGM. But so as we go, it dynamically says your clearance changes. Now that you have this, you're not allowed. Now the question comes, okay, I worked for Coke 50 years ago. Okay, I'm not that old, but unless I worked as a really young child. I worked for Coke 20 years ago. Am I still prohibited from working from Pepsi? The ultimate rules in Chinese wall says no. I mean, yes, I'm always limited. A modified version allows you to have a time limit. Oh, the last time you accessed Coke stuff was more than 5 years ago. You're good to go. You've now, we removed you from that conflict class. Kind of a non-compete type clauses. So completely different way of looking at things than the Bell LaPadula or the BIBA. And it's a very interesting model. Couple papers, several papers have been written in this about all of these, but this one was, I think, in the 90s that they published that, where Bell LaPadula was in the 70s. I think BIBA was in the early 80s. This was in the mid 90s. Physical access control. Very different. Again, we don't have the models. You just need to think about these things, right? Because if somebody has physical access, it may change what's happening. The book talks about examples of keeping traffic in its lanes, but we could do the same thing. Keys, swipe cards, people, guards, locks, tokens, which would be smart token type things that you plug into a machine, metal detectors, scanners, people searching you to see how are you bringing a thumb drive out of the building, are you bringing a cell phone into the building. One thing we see in cybersecurity is the issue of people violating physical access control to allow them to get more information about what's going on inside the system. If I can wander a building, I could start seeing the names on doors. I could possibly grab paper from recycle bins. I get names of people. I start seeing things. That may give me more information before I do a hack. I've also found out you go to the break room, you start talking to people. They may ask you, oh, I'm new here. I'm working for so, because you just saw their name down this, I'm working for so-and-so. And you start talking about what projects people are working on. Because you're physically located in a similar location, people might think, oh, you're in this building. It's kind of a secure building. We can talk more. So the process, one way that people get in is what we call tailgating, or drafting is another term, where basically somebody opens a door and I go in behind them. Right. So swipe card is required for me to get in, but I don't do it. Well, why would they let me in? Maybe my hands are full because I'm carrying coffee and donuts. I'm carrying things, because, oh, we're having a break. And it's like this. And they're, oh, thank you very much. Here, why don't you take a coffee or why don't you take a donut? I know I was doing consulting for a company down in California, that built software for Defense Department. Actually, built software that was used by defense contractors. So, like Lockheed Martin for helicopters and radios and all these other things. So I was doing some consulting, cybersecurity consulting for them, and I remember I had a meeting with one of the guys. I tried to call him on my phone to say, "Hey, I'm here. Let me in the building," but it was a little off hours. There was no guard at the building, or receptionist at the place I could check in. That door was locked. What he didn't tell me was I was supposed to go to the next building over, get checked in there, and then walk. So as I'm looking around, somebody comes in and walks in the building. So I just walked in behind them. Walked up to the guy's office. I found the directory, found where his office, walked in, knocked on his door, and he's like, "How'd you get here? They're supposed to call me when you get in. Where's your visitor badge? Because you're supposed to have a visitor badge, so you're allowed there." I said, "Oh, I just walked in right behind." Oh, he was so upset. You're not supposed to be able to do that. I said, it was real easy. I was enough behind the person. I caught the door right before it closed. They didn't even turn around and look. And I didn't say anything. I just kept walking. He says, "Okay, more training, more training." But they had downsized a little. Their budget was down, and so they didn't have guards everywhere. They didn't have receptionists in all the buildings, and this. Anyway, there's a lot of things that happen when we deal with people, when we deal with social engineering. The idea is trying to get somebody, excuse me, using the way people behave in society to learn information to violate the security. We'll talk about some of these later, but things like you get a phone call. "Hey, this is Jim from Information Technology Service, from ITS, and we noticed there's a problem on your system. Can you help me right now? I need to log in. Can you give me your password?" And they'll do that. Dumpster diving, where you go and find papers inside the dumpsters, papers that hadn't been shredded. "Oh, I now see code names, or I see product names, or I see the source code of a product. And I see, oh, this is how you wrote the code. Here's your security features. I can now fix it." Lots of things we see there. Why? Because people broke the access control model. There was physical things taken out of the computer system and managed physically, whether it's doors, whether it's printouts, whether it's thumb drives, and the chain of custody, the control over those get broken. So yes, many times it's a thumb drive that's lost somewhere, and somebody picks it up and finds the data. I know faculty have done research where they'll go to eBay and buy used hard drives, because people have sold their hard drives to get money, sold their old computers. And it's amazing what data is on these used hard drives, because people didn't delete them. I know our university now has a policy. Whether or not it's actually implemented all the time, I don't know. I know we had one system administrator who didn't do it and got fired for it. But I have an old computer. The system administrator is supposed to take that computer, take out the hard drive, and destroy it. And usually they destroy it by drilling through it a couple times. If it's a SSD hard drive, I don't know what they're supposed to do. I guess, again, with that one, you want to break it, you want to destroy it. If you have something this size that's, this is not SSD, but something like this that goes in your machine, can I break it? Can I do things? Is the data still there? Could somebody recover it? And so, part of what we think when we think of access control is, what are the physical accesses people are going to have? Where is the data moving? If this was, this is RAM, so it's not going to matter. But if it was an SSD type card and it has data, or a thumb drive, here, I got my thumb drive. If somebody finds this, there's data on it. The computer system is no longer protecting it. The access control system of the computer system is no longer in control. If it's not protected outside of the access control system, like with encryption or other things, we've broken the model. That is something Bell LaPadula and Biba never talk about. We have other more advanced models that deal with what we call information flow. starting with, well, it started with database theory. Okay, let's think about that for a second, right? Let's assume, I'll keep the really simplest one because we can do an inference. Let's assume we had 10 people in a room or in a group, and I said, this is the average salary of those 10 people. And then I took out one person and I recalculated the average. And these are the average of these 9 people. Well, I can do the math and figure out exactly what that 10th person's salary was. Even though I never knew it, I never had access to it. Because I had access to a piece of it, it was included in an average, and now not included in another average, I can do the math. Census data deals with that all the time. Are there ways of selecting pieces of the census data to get information that you're not supposed to have access to? Because I want to take things, it's classified. I'm not supposed to know your salary, not supposed to know your, whatever personal information you have, medical information, other things. But the census is supposed to take it, combine it in a way, and declassify it, take it out of the protected information, make it public. A lot of different types of database things do that. Well, once they do that, the question with access control models or information flow models is, can I still figure out information? Do I get a piece of the information here? And maybe a piece here and a piece here, bring them all together. And it gets really complex. One good example was there was a politician, I think congressman or something, and he was sick, and he didn't want people to know that he had cancer. So he went to a hospital in his hometown. He knew people there to get checked on. Well, the hospital releases data. Hey, we had so many patients. We had, and it was a small town, small hospital. So they released data like, yeah, in the month of October, we had, maybe one man in his 50s who came in for cancer treatment. And tying that in with this guy's travel schedule and other things, a reporter was able to figure out, oh, he was the person going in for cancer treatment. The hospital here in Moscow right now, because of COVID and patient privacy, they're releasing what COVID information they have. What they say is, we have, since the start of COVID, we've admitted, say, 29 people into the hospital with COVID. Next week, they'll say maybe we've admitted 32. Okay, so I knew there's 3 new ones. They never talk about how many are currently in the hospital. They do not give the age categories of who they've admitted because the numbers are too small. And they don't say, anything about deaths. If somebody died, they don't say what they died of, etc. Because that's private information. We want to keep it confidential, but they want to release statistics about it. So this is something we'll get to when we talk about privacy later in the semester, is how do these access control models deal with subsets of data, of summaries of data where you're trying to release stuff, but not too much stuff.